You're listening to the Modern People Leader podcast, where we go behind the scenes with today's top HR leaders and work experts. We talk to them about how they've gotten to where they're at, what they do every day, and what they see coming next for the future of work. Hope you enjoy. And welcome back to the Modern People Leader. This is our first guest recording of the year. We had one episode that went out earlier this week that was awards for 2024, but you're our first guest of the year. How's your year so far? I know we're only 9 days in, but...
Yes, I mean, 2025 certainly seems to be on track to be one to remember based on how the first 9 days are going. Very honored to be your first guest, but so far so good. Yeah.
I guess I should also mention repeat guest. So if you're listening to this episode and you haven't listened to Sam's first episode, it was back when she was with the Spurs. So I don't remember the episode number off the top of my head. I used to be really good at that. But if you go to the search bar in our show on Spotify, you can just type in Spurs. I'd recommend listening to that one first. But,
thank you.
But nice. Yeah, let's do good news stories.
Yes, good news stories. I'm starting.
Yeah.
Yes.
You kick it off.
Yeah, so I have transitioned since the last podcast. You mentioned the last one was when I was at the San Antonio Spurs. So I'm currently at the Ladies Professional Golf Association, or the LPGA, as their Chief People and Internal Operations Officer. To recap how I got here, I mean, like any person who takes on a job, but especially in my role as a people leader, a recruiter reaches out. At the time, I was very focused on getting to a vacation. So, I was unsure if I was going to respond, but it was a great message. And I was curious, so I took the call and I realized I didn't know a lot about the LPGA. And the more I learned, the more I wanted to know more and keep learning. And the role was really distinctive. So I took that call, I took the next call, and the next call, even through my vacation, just because I was so intrigued. And I think it's important to note, the LPGA is in its 75th anniversary this year. The organization proudly rests on this really awesome foundation from the efforts and spirit of our 13 founders who were overlooked, but super talented and tenacious in creating a space for women to play golf. They weren't given the opportunity. They didn't take it. They had to make it. So one of the most inspiring things about the LPGA is just there's such a great community, and the organization is the most established in offering the world's best female golfers a platform and a field to play in, while also being like this nucleus for teaching professionals, girls golf, amateur golf players, player alumni, and others to play the game they love from adolescence to retirement. That's how cool golf is. Like, you really don't have to put an age on it, right? So I just really loved how the mission is woven into everything that they do. And the role itself is a combination of HR, facilities, and internal operations, with the latter being about how you think about an organization's internal operating system, and then strategic planning, supporting the commissioner in organizational leadership. So great team here. Grateful to be here.
I feel like golf is in that growth phase that the NBA was in, probably like, I guess, in the 80s, 90s, and then up until now. It feels like the game's growing so fast. I got into golf last year, probably around March or so, like March or April, and I'm obsessed. I'm still not good. Like, I still haven't even broken 90. Like, my best score is a 90 flat, but I am absolutely obsessed. I got into it at the same time as my wife. What's been fun for us is we'll actually watch LPGA tour events like in preparation for going to play, because women golfers are just like, they have the purest form, like better than a lot of the men, because the men have like the power, but the women just have that like technique, like that textbook form. So like one thing they say in golf is find a golfer to watch before you go out and play, and your body will just naturally emulate them. And so all that to say, I've become a big LPGA fan, and now we're having a baby, a little girl, and both of us want to get her into golf. So,
oh my gosh, congratulations. Yeah. Wow. You came in hot on the good news stories.
I know. Yeah.
Golf. We've been watching the LPGA. I've been inspired in my form. And we're having a baby girl who's also going to end up. I mean, like,
Just drop that. You don't know like how many Nelly Corda videos I've watched in the last year. Like she is so
she's
good.
fantastic. I mean,
yeah. And that like wasn't even my planned good news story. Like the one thing I'll add in here is, and this is business related, we have had a really good week at MPL, and we locked in our 2 Q1 sponsors. So we locked in Atlassian and Chart Hop, and these they were on our list of dream sponsors for the last 2 years. And so to start 2025 with 2 sponsors like that, I mean, we've had Annie Dean on the show, and she was incredible, and we wanted them to be a sponsor ever since. And with Chart Hop, we talked to Ian maybe like 2 years ago at Transform, and we left that meeting just like blown away. He's like a walking encyclopedia for HR tech. So I'm really excited. Like that's my good news. I'll stop right there. Steven, what do you got?
Dang, Daniel.
I know, he really cleaned up. That's amazing.
It's like, wow, how do I follow that? Well, mine now seems very basic. My good news. So for our audience that actually watches YouTube, you're a small group of people right now. Hopefully more people will go watch these episodes, but you will notice that my background changed. So back behind me, there used to be like a reading nook, like a rocking chair back there. And geez, like 2 months ago, maybe 3 months ago, my fiance decided she wanted to learn how to play the drums. And shortly thereafter was like, oh my God, I love this. I want to get a drum set. And so we rented a drum set, and I thought it was going to be like a rinky dink, like electronic one, but she went all out for like a real drum set. Those that know me also know that I used to play the drums for 12 years, and I stopped in college when I realized there was like no future in that for me. And it takes a lot of time to practice and do all the thing. And I was always getting complaints from my neighbors. So it's been a long time, and I started drumming. The benefit of my fiance picking up on a hobby is I could pick up an old hobby of mine, like an old reminiscent, like I was in drumline. It was like a big thing. And so I'm now 48, and it's a lot different trying to play the drums after 20 years of not doing it, a lot older. Like, I've got this funny wrist pain. And I finally, after like, I don't know, a month and a half of like solid playing, like every week, played through my first song, like from beginning to end. Awesome. And so that's progress. That's my good news.
What'd you play?
It was Red Hot Chili Peppers, Give It Away, which is a pretty legit, like that. It's not an easy, I'm not choosing We Are the Champions or any like super basic, but yeah, there's a couple parts in there that I need to clean up, but I got through it from beginning to end. It's all good.
All right, y'all, we've got some big news, or maybe not big news. You may have heard about this already, but we are doing MPL Live in Boston on March 6th. We followed the data this time, and the data was telling us we needed to go to Boston, so we're going to Boston. It's a top 3 city for us follower-wise. We owe so much to the incredible HR leaders who have been with us from the start that happen to be from Boston. Shout out to the MPL legends like Katie Burke, Dina Upton, Jen Paxton, Adrian Barnard, Tracy Sponenberg. I mean, there are just so many. I feel like I'm leaving a bunch of folks out, but I think that just speaks to how deep the Boston People Leader bench really is. So here's what you can expect. We're going to do a speed networking session. So 60 minutes to meet as many people as possible. And if you can remember the most people superpowers from the people that you meet, it'll definitely come in handy for you, and you'll find out more on why at the event. And then the main event is the live podcast. So shout out to Katie Burke for these recommendations, but so far we have 2 amazing speakers lined up. We have Carmel Galvin, who's the Chief People Officer at Clavio, and we have Linda Aiello, who's the Chief People and Culture Officer at DraftKings. It's going to be a fun night. It'll be about 4 hours. And if you're in Boston and you're still listening to this ad, I think this is your sign to go grab your ticket. We'll put a link in the show notes.
But we've already sold a good amount of tickets, and we're going to cap it at some point. So I'd highly recommend you go grab your ticket right now.
That is, wow. I mean, bravo. Those were great stories. I also love how they're connected to your partners as well. So I got to work on my good news. My husband did not get a job at the LPGA, but we are supposed to take golf lessons with each other very soon.
Nice. Yeah,
I'd highly recommend it.
I agree. I mean, there's teaching professionals all across this office building, so I actually have no excuse. It's just been a little busy.
I think that is a pretty good excuse. Probably put it, and we're going to talk a little bit about, what your goals are for the year from an HR perspective. But before we get into the like proper conversation, one follow-up question I had, like so Daniel and I are both very interested in women's sports. He kind of shared his story. My story is a little different. I'm a proud girl dad. I have a 12-year-old and 14-year-old, soon to be 13 and 15. And my oldest daughter, so I've always been very into women's sports, obviously watching them play. My fiance got the Everyone Loves Women's Sports shirt. Yeah. And so my youngest daughter, she decided that she just wanted to try all the sports. So she tries out, she was a soccer player also, but not super into it, tries out for volleyball. Never played volleyball, makes the B team, tries out for basketball. So I've over the fall, I've been exposed to all these sports I never watched before. And it's just so amazing. And I told Daniel, my new favorite sport is B team girls basketball, because it is so wild. The physicality is insane. Anything could happen at any point in time. So
physicality.
So I'm serious. You could see in my daughter's face, she was scared out there. She got fouled on her first play, first touch of the ball. She gets a chokehold put around her. Yeah, these girls are not playing. And so that is, before we move on, I just had to ask, so you obviously were in an HR role with the San Antonio Spurs, and now you're in an HR role with, the LPGA, which, men's sports, women's sports. So what is the biggest difference so far?
I mean, besides the obvious of the sports are different, and then as are the genders, I mean, the LPGA is really like a league. So and it's an individual sport, right? It's not a team sport. The way there's lots of things, with the Spurs, there's a particular place where they play. With the LPGA, you have 35 events. Every event is really a week. So you're going to different courses every single week. That's a lot of weeks in a year where you're in different places, and you kind of move into somebody's house, so to speak, these golf courses, get all set up and ensure it's ready for the pro-am, for the actual players themselves. And then you pack everything up on Sunday, and by Monday, you're in a different place. In a couple of weeks, we start our season, our 75th anniversary season. And so being out there, I went to our tournament at the Pelican, the Annika, and it was just amazing, the differences, right? I've gotten so used to a stadium and arena environment. And that, I think there is something really cool about, our player group. You have people who are teenagers and you have people who are in their 40s. That's a pretty amazing thing to say is true, and probably doesn't exist in many other areas. And what can I say? I'm biased, but women are awesome. And they're really good. And sometimes I do have this moment where I'm saying the world's best female golfers, which is these are some of the world's best golfers that they exist on this tour. They're just that good. And they're so smart and kind and humble and just really interested in supporting each other and getting more opportunities to do what they love. So, and then seeing people who are fans of theirs out on the course, watching them do what they do best. So it's an exciting time. I mean, the whole sort of furor around women's sports is cool. it's also like, perhaps a little strange, right? Because, LPGA is 75 years old. It's like, we've always been here, but starting to become more known. The WNBA, I think people forget WNBA and WSL, they didn't exist for too long. WTA has been around for a while, right? So I think it's great that there's so much energy around it, and these athletes are really being seen for the talent that they have. And I think that's the story that's important for me that we should be leading with. Not, I think for decades before, it was like a diversity play to invest or look at, women's sports. And to me, it's like, this is just good business. These are competitive, really good athletes that you want to watch. So get in while you can, right? But yeah, it's certainly like gaining steam, right? That's an important part of the moment right now.
And did I see right that the LPGA and PGA are going to team up this year? Or maybe they're talking about it for future years for an event?
Oh, there's an event that we did back in December. It's called the Grant Thornton Invitational, where LPGA and PGA tour players play in, oh my God, what do they call them? Pairs. Yes. So that did happen. And that's a really cool tournament. We don't necessarily run it, but we work with the PGA on it. And it's always fun. I mean, they all kind of know each other. They don't really see each other around. Our tour schedules don't really mirror each other, but golf is golf, and it's a lot of the same sponsors, a lot of same companies and all that stuff. So they run into each other, and they all kind of live in similar areas in South Florida or across Florida. So yeah, but that was in December, which was really cool.
I feel like we could spend another 20 minutes talking about golf. So 2024 was an interesting year. I think it presented quite a few challenges for people leaders, especially in industries like tech. Growth stalled a bit. Some tough decisions had to be made, and teams had to operate in a more scrappy way. And I know the sports industry is a bit different. Maybe you're shielded from that a bit. I don't know. But I'm sure you had your own unique set of challenges. And so I'm curious, what are you trying to carry over from 2024? Are there one or two things that you learned as a people leader that you want to carry into 2025?
Yeah, it's always so interesting to just reflect on a year gone by. But as I was thinking about this, as a people leader, you could grow a bit cynical over time, right? But just as easily, you also definitely believe in humanity and redemption because you've seen so much, right? In our roles, you never quite reach the bottom of the endless bucket of scenarios that come across your desk. And I embrace and enjoy that part of what we get to do. And what I've learned, sort of speaking to what your question is that every problem can usually be solved, and that you got to really focus on what matters, what is in your span of control, and how you're using your impact, your influence, and leadership to deepen that impact, to bring on change. That's really where it's most valuable. All the other stuff, you just can't sweat it, right? So it's both fewer things done better, and then also not sweating the small stuff overall. I also learned that the best HR is really the ability to embrace all sides of what we do, as the coach, as the source of accountability, as the policymaker, as the spokesperson, as the facilitator, and so on, not just one dimension. And too often that's how our roles are interpreted. So I think it's important to continue to ensure we get to play all sides of that so folks can see, the dynamic nature of what we do, but also we continue to create more seats at the table for our voices.
Love that. And since the theme today is really all things 2025, both HR for your team at the LPGA, I was just curious, what are the leadership goals for yourself? What does that look like for the year?
Yeah, so my role's new, and the organization has, while it's been around for 75 years, it's grown quite a bit in the last 2 to 3 years. So in my onboarding, I spent a lot of time listening to really define what my mandate was. So my role is both new for me and new to the association, and when I say new. So as we look ahead, I'm really focused on, hey, what do we need to build, evolve, and maintain? from learning and development pathways to better engagement surveys and action plans to change management in an unprecedented time of change everywhere, both within your organization and outside of it. So we know we have to up our strategic partnership game with the business. That is definitely an area of focus. And for me, right, I'm onboarding into my role and teaching the organization how to both leverage me and the rest of my team. And then this is where all sides of my scope, what I mentioned, HR, facilities, internal operations, really play well together and reinforce each other, right? Because it's all about the organization, its people, and its leadership.
And I guess for you, given that this is a new role for you as Chief People Officer, congrats, by the way, and it's a new role for the organization, like, do you have like any like mantras that you've set for yourself as for the year? Like, I don't know, like, I know it's kind of corny, but is there something that you're trying to remind yourself every day as somebody that's stepping into this role for the first time?
Oh, it's so interesting you said that. There's something that I read recently from John Steinbeck, and I hope I can get the quote right because it is kind of emblematic of where my head is at now, both as I think about goals and also where I am in my career. And it says, and now that you don't have to be perfect, you can be good. I do think there's a lot of, well, in your career in general, if you consider yourself an ambitious person, you're trying to ensure that, you're doing a great job at work that is very complex, but also really critical. So most people leaders that you've sat down with, I'm sure, feel an enormous sense of responsibility all the time, always. And then you're trying to ensure, too, that especially since COVID, you're making enough space and time for yourself to recover from a job that really just takes so much of you. So I think I like that quote because it's a really good reminder, especially as a woman of color, just being totally transparent, that it isn't necessarily about perfection because perfection isn't reflective of humanity. It's more about that concept of you can be good, being like you showing up as your best is often the best way to start each day. And probably the mantra I'm going to have to use each day, knowing that 2025 is set to be a mini layered onion. Maybe it's a cake, but onion provides some cautious optimism. I do like onions in meat, what do they say, in moderation.
Yeah. Cautious optimism. It's been a theme for me and Steven recently. And something else that we always keep in our planning docs is perfect is the enemy of good. So we can relate with both of those. Yes. And so I know we don't have you forever and I want to keep us moving. Let's get to 2025 predictions. Question one, what's one thing you hope that we or HR, the HR world, leaves behind in 2025?
I would say playing small and not owning our rightful seat at the table. I spoke to the LinkedIn Talent Connect conference in October, and the session that I did was focused on being a strategic partner in HR. And it was pretty remarkable to me how many people felt they could not really fulfill that persona where they worked and that there were challenges, either how they viewed themselves or just what they were hearing from their leaders. So, I'd just say, like, look, our organizations need us now more than ever, which feels like the thing that I say every January, but it does seem to always be true. So it's up to us to embrace that and identify the gaps that we are uniquely positioned to fill in, and also demonstrate our agility to ride the waves alongside the business. And there are waves. There is not really any calm waters around here. So the last thing I'd say is that in terms of leaving behind, I know you said one, but I'm going for two, is really outdated technology. Pain to manage. It's a time suck for lean teams, of which people and HR teams usually are. And you got to be loosened up or use technology as leverage to really focus on the most critical priorities. So not tech debt is real, and probably the most substantive tech debt exists in HR. So you have to view technology as a lever to scale, to offer enhanced service to employees, to be better partners to the business, and to work smarter. Otherwise, you're part of the problem.
I love both of those. The first one, just to add kind of some thoughts to that, I think that resiliency is going to be a really important trait. Or I guess what I'm trying to say is I think we're going to need to I hope we can find more resiliency, the HR community, because as I was hearing you speak, I feel like I can hear that those conversations with HR leaders, who work for organizations that said they were committed to, that they trusted their HR leader and asked them to lead the way in terms of DEI, asked them to lead the way in terms of finding a new way to work, a better way to work, only to change that plan on both of those fronts. And those are just like two of the things within our remit. And, those things did happen. And that really is sucky that those things have happened. But it's the environment that we live in. And, I feel like I think it was Steve Cadigan we had on the show in year one. And he talked about how being resilient was such an important characteristic of the workforce. And I think that this is the year that HR needs to kind of find our resiliency, because it's been to Daniel's point, it's been really tough the last year. So that was just something that came up for me as I heard you talking, because it does boggle my mind that it's 2025, y'all. It's 2025, and we're talking about, do we have a strategic seat at the table or not? I started in HR in 2000, and we were talking about that just to kind of illustrate my point. But love that, and I won't even touch the second one. I agree with that. But I could fill a whole hour just talking about the insanity of some of the things we're doing in HR with outdated tech. Moving on to the next question, if you had to pick one buzzword or concept that's just going to dominate our LinkedIn feeds or the HR space in 2025, what would it be and why?
I mean, you have to say AI. There is just so much emphasis on it in general business and in HR. Everyone is wondering. And it's interesting, right? Like the general business part is like, how is your business leveraging it? How are you preparing your teams and organization and employees to use it? And then the HR side is like, well, what tools exist to optimize our work as well? And if you're not using it, you're behind. So look, employees are using it every day. It's pretty much at your fingertips. It took me a minute last year to realize that Google Gemini was populating those responses at the top of every Google search. And I was like, oh, there it is. And now it's happening. It's everywhere. Which is cool. I do appreciate that. So I think we have to figure out, I'm not anti-AI. I think it's more just figuring out like what's its rightful place. The best tools are chosen with a distinctive need in mind, and to really reflect on what's truly right for disruption versus what's too much, where we just flooding the airwaves. And that's not helpful, right? So AI applied in a curated way, and it is always going to be the best path to leading to the most adoption and honestly the most effectiveness, because that's really why people are excited about it, right? Is the opportunity to be more efficient and productive. And it doesn't absolve us from the roles we're all uniquely positioned to play, right? And running our day-to-day efforts. It's not like we just let every, AI take over. It's a tool. So.
I think that's a great one. There's this podcast I listen to. It's called My First Million. Kind of a corny name, but it's these two guys who are successful entrepreneurs. One of them used to run the newsletter The Hustle. The other one, I can't remember what his company did. But anyways, they have this really great podcast. And one of the guests that they had on recently was the CTO of HubSpot. I can't remember his name. I used to work there.
Is it Whitney Sorensen?
No, it's...
Dharmesh.
Yes, that guy.
Yeah.
And so he's building another company at the same time as being, the CTO of HubSpot. And it's this idea of building AI agents. So, right now, if we think of ChatGPT as like a single agent, there's all these like point solutions that that you can create with ChatGPT. Like imagine a world where all of those are Legos and you're using all of these Lego pieces to like string something together. So let's say for any given process, there's 10 steps and you have like 10 different bots that you've created the idea of being able to connect them all and being able to prompt the human to intervene at the necessary step in the process. I think like that's the next iteration of where we're going. I don't know what that looks like for HR. And so I wrote about this in the newsletter the other week, and somebody responded to my email saying like, hey, like what companies are doing this for HR? I don't know. So this is more of just like, hey, if you're listening to this and you know somebody doing this, let me know. And I want to respond to this guy and tell him. But yeah, I think that's where we're heading. So if you're late to the party and haven't even jumped on ChatGPT or Gemini or
Microsoft Copilot.
or what's Anthropic?
Everybody's got some.
I forget what theirs is called. But yeah, like just go in there, play with it. Like if you don't figure that out, you're going to be so far behind when the next iteration comes. So I love that one.
Agreed.
All right. So last prediction. What challenges do you think HR leaders will face the most in 2025, and how should they prepare?
So DEI, but I do see it as an opportunity, and rather than as a challenge. I guess you could call them the same thing, right? So for many years, the push on DEI was really just try to bake it into the operating system, bake it into the walls of the organization versus treating it as a training or a department. So I think we have an opportunity to take a step back and go, how do we incorporate working inclusively in our ways of working, and also in the ways in which we run our employee life cycle, do business, right? It's not just host a bias training here or do this thing here. It's more of just like, well, what does it mean to run a meeting inclusively? What does it mean to do a performance review inclusively? What does it mean to think about the event logistics for this upcoming tournament inclusively? Those are the types of questions I think now, given the climate, we need to consider and be reminded that the evidence is there, right? That DEI, inclusion, all of this stuff has always been good for every bottom line and every business. I would say the other challenge is we've changed a lot. I mean, when you think about the rate at which organizations are changing, I came from two tech organizations before I got into sports. It's always been a fast clip. I think employees are probably really fatigued. And yet there's not any way you can say to any employee, no matter the organization, in good faith, there aren't other big changes ahead in 2025 and beyond. To that end, employees really are craving humanity and trust. They want those things because both of those things mean that they're willing, if we go with a nautical analogy, to ride in the speedboat or the cruise ship at whatever speed and with whatever tide and through whatever storm, but they're likely unwilling to do that if they don't have those two things. And humanity means you talk to them like they're people, not widgets, right? And you're really transparent about what you can do and what you can't. It doesn't mean, everybody gets a vote and that it's consensus, et cetera, which often leads a lot of leaders to step away from that. But it does mean you recognize they have choices about where they work, and how you treat them is going to be everything. And same with trust, not just earning it, but retaining it. It's ongoing all the way. The last one I would say is more internal to people leaders, which is we got to pace ourselves. We got to take care of ourselves. We say this all the time, but the reason it keeps coming up is because it's different degrees of effectiveness every year, right? So I said this earlier, every year has been a big year since COVID. So I feel like we're repeating ourselves, but it's true. You just don't know what is ahead of you. And we've just got a marathon ahead. It's like a pure marathon. So our ability to navigate what's known and unknown really starts with being super intentional about, one, our boundaries, how we preserve our peace, how we're more strategic and not doing everything, but really the things that matter. I'm thinking particularly of, my former colleagues in tech who are operating with leaner teams with still high expectations, and who knows what's ahead of them. Like we have to take those steps and invest and then keep reinforcing that, right? And honestly, not get too far ahead of ourselves.
I love that. And I want to dig into that, but I promised earlier that we would circle back to your goals. And you mentioned earlier that you're onboarding into a new role. And you also mentioned that the role is new at the company, at the LPGA.
That's true.
And so I think there's like two dimensions of goal setting. It's like, okay, what does HR look like for the LPGA? And what are the goals for me and my team in order to like get ourselves? So there's a lot wrapped into goals. So I'm just curious for 2025, like what are the biggest goals that you and the people team have? And kind of baked into that, if you can walk us through like the process that you went through to get to your final goals, and kind of what is that one rock? Like if there's only one of the many things you're looking to accomplish, what is the one that must happen and why? So
It's a great question. So yes, new role, and I'm onboarding. So the great thing, and I mentioned before about onboarding, is you do a lot of listening. You meet a lot of people, especially given the nature of my role, wanting to connect with them. So I'm all about pattern recognition, and you start to hear things, right? You're doing that needs assessment, and you're also listening for what people are and aren't saying. Both things are actually quite important when you have the opportunity to talk to dozens of people in a short period of time in terms of understanding where the needs are and then where the priorities likely should be. So when I think about our biggest goals in 2025 for the people team, one is around performance management and really formalizing that roadmap for performance, growth, and development into one big cycle and circle that's simple, that's automated and technology enabled, and also provides support both for individual contributors and managers, meeting them where they are, right, within reason. So that might mean coming up with different tools that they can leverage in self-service on their own. But it also means places where my team is there to support in a hands-on way where it matters, whether that is we're in performance review cycle season right now, and that it means providing like really comprehensive structured coaching on like how you go about writing a review, having tough conversations, like rather than waiting for someone to ask us, let's just talk about what happens if your direct report chooses one rating and you choose another and they don't match. Right? Like, let's just bring the information to you. The other is around employee engagement. And there's two sides to this. The other is establishing clear strategy around what we're trying to measure on what cadence. The other is we have so much people data. And you need to be sitting down quarterly to really look across all the things, whether it's demographics and headcount and location and, oh my gosh, retention, voluntary, involuntary attrition, et cetera. That helps to contextualize things because so often you're making decisions based on anecdotes versus the fact that you have these reports and analytics and dashboards available to you all the time. But it takes real intention and commitment to sit with that and ensure that, for me, my team is knowledgeable of it. So when we go out, connect with the business, or I'm talking to the commissioner, et cetera, I have that in my back pocket. And that's also buttressing our strategy for the year. The surveys themselves are great because that is the most real-time feedback you can get about like how is everybody really doing. And I am committed this year to ensuring we're listening in new ways, and we're trying to understand correlations, trying to pick up on insights that might not just be on the surface as we look at those surveys. The last one is around HR tech and self-service because we have an opportunity to be doing more with our current tech suite and then to further improve it. And then also to remove ourselves from processes that just don't make sense for us to be involved with. Everything adds up when you think about the volume. So that's that piece. As far as the process, I shared this with you both. I'm very passionate about strategic planning and goal setting. It's like one of my favorite things to do, but it's probably because I like lists. The other reason why it's my favorite is because I think sometimes it veers into inefficiency in so many different organizations. I'm not just talking about, whether you're in sports, or you're in tech, et cetera, like you just overthink the thing. It's like the key place where an organization can easily get sucked into analysis paralysis, which is why those big management consulting firms exist to just plop right in and help you structure, order it, and make it make sense and be comprehensive. So there's a book that I recommend to people all the time called The One Thing. That book has a series of case studies about different organizations, many of them that you know today. I think Apple is one of them. And it talks about these key crossroads they had where they could have chosen so many things to do. But before they hit that moment of greatness, they had almost like a moment of clarity, a moment of silence that said, I got to do just this one thing. And that means saying no to all the other things in order to achieve it. And so in that book, they talk about effort and impact and the fact that your list really needs to be short in order to achieve depth. So I always come from a perspective of 5 or fewer when I'm thinking about big goals in order to drive impact. And the key part of that too is, right, like there's all the things you can plan for, but then there are things that are undoubtedly going to fall from the sky. Definitely in HR. I mean, you can be proactive and you should be, but the natural part of your job is being reactive too. So you want the list to be short so you can absorb those things, because a list of 10 makes it harder to do that, and same for your team. It puts strain on that. And then psychologically, right, you feel like you're behind. So again, my onboarding provided me like optimal time to connect with staff, to learn more, to like test out some things and to share with people like, hey, I hear what you're saying. And I've heard that from other people too. What do you think about this? So I feel like I had a unique sort of accelerator in goal setting and having clarity, and also being able to verify like these are the right things. But there's that balance, right, about like what people said, what they're not saying, and then what I think. And just kind of between those 3 buckets, being able to determine like, here's the right way forward. Did I answer all of your questions? I feel like I'm missing some things.
The only thing you're missing is if you could only pick one of these goals, what would it be and why? Like,
Well,
what's the most critical rock?
that's really hard.
I know it's
All
hard
of
to
the things
pick.
that I just said are important. I guess I go back to performance and growth and development. Like that is kind of your bedrock of, and a part of that is because the most important relationship when you think about an employee is between them and their manager. So you got to have really strong structures, practices, support around that to ensure they're successful. You know, everyone thinks that people and culture is responsible for culture. It's in our name. We do it to ourselves. Do it to ourselves. It's tough. And hey, I'm not saying that we don't have an influence. We do. But we are not the only people at this party with influence and who have control. Like we might be in charge of choosing the venue, but then the CEO chooses the music, or the CFO chooses what kind of dance floor it is, right? Like it's a participatory sport. Like everyone has to play their role, do their job, and we all have influence. And that manager, direct report, or even the culture you feel within your department and team, that's where the weather forecast comes out of. It's going to be a great day. It's going to be a rainy day. It's going to be, a snowy day, because apparently from a weather perspective, we're having challenges, and in Texas it's snowing. So like, I do think those things that right there is always going to be kind of like the undercurrent of making sure people have a good experience and that they're receiving feedback, there's dialogue, they're growing, maybe not always through a promotion, but through other ways. And we're creating the time.
And so with that being, the most critical goal for the team, and it sounds like you have like your brain thinks in lists and process and systems, like where do you start? Like what's the next step? Is it doing an audit of where you're currently at and like making a list of like low-hanging fruit, what's going to be like highest value? You walked us through like a little matrix that you use for decisions, and I'm wondering if that also plays into it.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Daisy, did I talk about Daisy before? Yeah. So I would say next steps on this is we're in our performance review cycle right now. You get so much good data coming out of a review cycle. So you owe it to yourselves, especially given the Herculean effort it takes for the organization to get through it, to sit in that data and understand where you're noticing some trends, right? Like to really dice it up and reflect on what you've learned, just as you would the results of an engagement survey. And then from there, while we might have a plan about, hey, here's how this roadmap should look, here's how we want to structure quarterly growth and development conversations, you take those learnings and then you use it to tweak it. And so that's what we'll do, particularly in February as our process comes to a close and we have that data in our system. From there, we'll start to roll out and go like, all right, y'all, you set your goals, you had those conversations, we're now in comp, et cetera, et cetera. But, oh, by the way, the conversation is going to keep going, because if we only do this once a year, then we're not really doing ourselves any favors. But the key with any of that, when you're asking people to do more, because now we're going to be in tournament season. So every week or every other week, we will have a thing, and we have the LPGA tour, but there's also the Epson tour. And we also have a wonderful partnership and joint venture with the Ladies European Tour. So you got people everywhere, all the places doing things. And that's not all we do. We have a foundation. We have over 600 global girls golf sites. So it's a lot. But this is important. And so when we ask to keep this top of mind so that these goals aren't filed away and then dusted off once a year, we have to think about simplicity. We have to think about making it super comprehensive. And then we have to repeat ourselves and be prepared to enable it heavily on the front end until it takes. Because the ideal scenario, how you know you've been successful and you've enabled these growth and development conversations, you've created really straightforward, curated, skill-based learning paths, cohorts for learning and development for managers, senior leaders that make sense, all of that stuff that feeds into what performance growth and development is that by the end of the year, people are like, oh yeah, I'm on my way to my growth and development conversation with my manager. And you're like, I haven't even sent out an invite yet. I haven't even sent out an email. And then managers and leaders are elevating really thoughtful, complex things that they might be encountering with their staff proactively. They're like, you know what? I feel like John might be ready for something, but it's about a year away. And I'm thinking about changing this. Those are my favorite things to come up. I'm like, succeeding. And it's kind of like being like a proud parent with a teenager. You like can't openly celebrate because you'll become uncool. So you got to do your own little private celebration party and then continue that fire of pushing things forward because you know it's really working.
I love all of that. And last follow-up question before we wrap the conversation up for today. So as far as tech stack, so what are, again, the one rock, we're looking at your performance processes. What does the tech stack look like? Do you have a preferred stack? And in terms of like, what are the tools that are included? And I'm asking this because I think a lot of people, this is front of mind for a lot of people this year. I think we talked about it a lot last year, and it seems that some of the feedback that we heard was it's easy to just be stuck in what you're doing and hard to kind of come up with a plan like what you just walked us through to go from current state to a better state, because there's technology decisions, there's all these things that are factored in. The company's done it the legacy way for so long usually. So, when you think about tech stack, either the types of tools or even specific vendors, like what does anything come to mind for you?
Yeah. So, we're continuing as always to evaluate the tools that we have. But I think the simplest way to think about your questions is, in my role in particular, is you got to have your HRIS. It's got to perform some key functions and interactions with staff. I tend to lead towards, and this is true more broadly in tech, I think people are embracing multi-point solutions, not a single point. Like single point to me is tough. Like it has to be something really, really particular. Maybe it's surveying or something like that with staff where you go single point, but HRIS is critical. So performance, comp, learning and development, workforce management, and what do they call it? They say workforce management, time and attendance, all those things, like those core processes, and making sure it's fluid. Now, you could have an applicant tracking system, because I know there are some ones out there that people are like, this is my favorite, I'll never part with it. As long as it integrates with the mothership, we don't have no problem. I like to try to see if you can get that into the HRIS too, but if it's important to you, and look, like candidate experience is super critical. Like sometimes HRIS providers are not always the best equipped to provide the very best tool because their tool has to do so much all the time, along with being incredibly secure. So I'd say those things are really huge. And then you have other tools. Well, one, comms is such an important part of people and culture. So you're not doing this right if you don't think that the email and messaging and sort of virtual meeting tools that you have at your organization aren't part of that stack, because you're constantly communicating with people. You're constantly trying to make sure they have context, or they have the information when they need to, or because of California fires, trying to ensure that they're safe where they are, or, so on and so forth. So that enablement is really key too, is like, it's all a part of it. And if you aren't using those tools to their maximum benefit, then you're behind. And that's something I learned actually during COVID, using Slack so much and using Gmail. Is like, I'm just throwing stuff out there, and I'm not going like, well, what's the optimum way to get the best out of this? Because I got to send at least, I don't even know how many emails to all staff, or to our senior leaders or to our C-suite all the time. But I'm just out here just throwing things out and not even looking to see if the call went in. I'm just, so I think your tech stack any tech stack can be awesome. I think the most friction is going to come from how many solutions you put into one. And then when you keep them separate, is it an intentional choice, or are you just sort of maintaining what you've inherited, right? And you always want to make intentional choices that add up, one, to less friction for your staff who has to administer the tools, and then certainly less friction and a great interface for your employees.
Yeah, I think anyone that has operated in a Frankenstein tech stack, that like part legacy, part like critical need, and you just cobbled it together. So centralize and streamline, I think, is a beautiful thing. Well, Sam, this has been awesome. We literally packed this in. Like we eliminated some of the traditional sections we had because we've already been over those traditions with you, but it's been a ton of fun. There's one last ritual that we have. We call it one word or phrase close. As you know, we all respond with a word or a few words from the episode that just kind of summarize the last hour that we spent together. And we prefer for our guests to go first. So.
Well, thank you. This is lovely, as always. I would say my word is uncharted. I get the sense that 2025 is giving like Back to the Future, where we're going, there are no roads energy. So I'm trying to surrender to that and embrace it.
Mine's going to be, it's kind of a cop-out answer, but I'm going to say 2025.
Oh, come on, bro.
Sorry.
Seriously?
I mean, those are words. That's a phrase.
Oh my God. Seriously, Daniel? Wow.
It's too easy.
Oh, wow. Okay. I can beat that. I'm going to go with resiliency because I said it earlier in our predictions, and Sam, you just mentioned your one word was uncharted, and I think that's right. And I think there's going to be there are going to be ups and downs and things that we didn't expect, and we're going to need to be resilient. So that's where I'm at. Well, thank you so much, Sam. This has been a joy. So I hope you'll come back. A lot of times when we have guests on that are very early to their new role, they like to come back 90 days later, 120 days later to share with us how things are going. So if you're interested in that, we would love to check in and have a follow to this combo.
I actually am like 100 and something days in. So I think maybe you can get me at like 6 months. And then, see if I'm still spry.
Yeah, we did that with Q Hamirani, and I thought it was a lot of fun. Like a 6-month check-in. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sure I'll have learned some more things and settled in even further. But it was so cool to reconnect with you.
Same. Well, until then, thanks again for joining us, and it was an amazing conversation. Thanks, Sam.
Thank you.
Bye, y'all.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of The Modern People Leader. We really, really appreciate it. And if you enjoyed the show, please leave us a 5-star rating. It would mean the world to us. And connect with us on LinkedIn. We want to know what you think about the show, and you can find links to both of our profiles in the show notes. Thanks again for listening, and see you on the next episode.